A lot to discuss. Let's get to our panel. Here in our studio, Joel Rubin is the president of the Washington Strategy Group. Also with us, Frank Sesno is the director of the School of Media and Public Affairs at George Washington University. From New York, we welcome journalist Aaron Matei, and John Sitilides with us here in the studio is a geopolitical strategist at Trilogy Advisors. Welcome to all of you. Aaron Matei, let me start with you in New York. You have been a steadfast skeptic of this entire story about there being some kind of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. Many of the biggest names in the United States media took another view. They were going in the other direction on some of the biggest brands, news brands in the United States. You've been vindicated now, but why were you so skeptical from the outset?
On the face of it, it just seemed farcical, this idea that Trump, who, as far as we could tell, didn't even really expect to win the presidency, would have conspired with the Russian government. We never quite heard exactly how he would have done that and for what purpose he would have and how they would have arranged this high-level conspiracy. And then as we saw the actual public evidence as it came out, and a lot of evidence has come out over the last 2 years, it just wasn't there. I mean, the people who were indicted for lying, none of their lies uncovered this conspiracy we kept hearing about. A series of leaks and anonymous claims turned out to be straight up false and had to be retracted to the embarrassment of the national media. And meanwhile, Trump's actual policies, far from serving Putin's interests, have been recklessly dangerous in escalating Cold War tensions. Part of the reason why I've been so opposed to this Russiagate madness. So it's not a surprise at all to see Robert Mueller finally, with all of his investigative authority, with his wide scope, rendering a verdict that says no collusion.
Frank, what do you make of what Aaron just told us? Was the media too quick to swallow the story?
Well, I think what the media was too quick to swallow the story to the exclusion of almost all else, certainly in certain sectors, in talk television, talk radio, where this just dominated everything, and that set the tenor and the tone. The investigation had to happen. There was something to investigate. But the story that gets lost here a little bit is, in some ways, the system really worked. There was an independent investigation of a very serious set of claims. What we're not hearing very much of is, okay, what then did Russia do? What actually was the role here? Where was the interference? That was part of what Mueller was supposed to be looking at too. But in terms of the media, this is a problem that has existed since cable television went on the air. It exists since talk radio went to its sort of ideological poles. We have to fill the air with something. When there's a shred, a scintilla, a scent of wrongdoing, we're going to be all over that. And then when it comes back and the narrative is different, if it is, it's like, oh my goodness, what did we do wrong? It's all about taking a breath, and unfortunately, many in the media are not very good at taking a breath.
Just one point, Frank. You did say that there's been a big focus on the story to the exclusion of almost everything else, but was there also a focus on television especially, on people who agreed with that narrative to the exclusion of dissenting voices?
Well, probably to some extent, but without, I mean, there was basis for that, and in many ways, the President of the United States himself fed it. The constant attack that he was on, the unwillingness to cooperate, the constant screaming about the witch hunt, the churn at the White House and the top levels of the administration, the charges and allegations that were leveled against his personal attorney and his campaign chairman, all fed a very real sense that something was really amiss, something was wrong. This isn't normal. This is scandalous. And so it fed the narrative. I think the problem was the degree of coverage, the tone of coverage, the proportionality that many in the media gave it, compared to just about all else.
Joel, let's look at the politics of this. For months, Democrats have been telling us that this report, the Mueller report's that's gonna be the mortal blow to the Trump presidency. I mean, how badly has this damaged Democratic credibility?
Well, I think you've already seen in recent weeks this fight play out in public. Nancy Pelosi has said, let's slow down on impeachment. We don't need to waste our time. Whereas some in the base have said we need to go forward with impeachment. And I think her cautious positioning is helpful to the Democrats in the House because there is a high ground here, which is why not release the whole report? If the president is off scot-free, what's the damage in letting the public see it? So there's that. And then there is this other question about what did happen actually in the 2016 elections. We need to know. We need to make sure that doesn't happen again. and is the president taking it seriously? So I do think the question of impeachment and obstruction of justice, that did take a blow, no doubt about it, but it doesn't mean that we're going to see the end of this.
When you say we need to know what happened in the 2016 election, Joel, are you saying that this report needs to be released, or are you satisfied with the investigation?
Well, when I was at the State Department, I would write cover letters like this on top of memos that we would send to Congress. This is just a political summary. This is not the full report. And so it's Attorney General Barr's interpretation of a report, but it's not the report. And the report was paid for by the American taxpayer.
Right.
Congress has a co-equal responsibility to safeguard national security, and there is a national security imperative that they understand what took place in 2016 to address that. If they're not given that information, then we can't address it.
John, no collusion or no criminal conspiracy, that's the legal term for it, but it looks like the jury's still out on the question of obstruction of justice.
I firmly disagree, Anand. There is no issue of obstruction of justice. It wasn't only Attorney General Barr.
That's not my view, that's the view of Democrats.
Understood. But it wasn't only Attorney General Barr, but it was also Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, who appointed Robert Mueller. The two of them together went through the Mueller report and co-wrote that 4-page letter that was issued over the weekend.
Yeah.
And it made very clear that there's, first of all, no collusion, no conspiracy, nothing along those lines. Secondly, we forget, it's not the job of a prosecutor or a special counsel to supposedly exonerate somebody. In America, you're innocent until proven guilty. Simple as that. So this exoneration is more of a semantic issue than anything else. The bottom line is there was no collusion, and there's never really should have been an investigation from my perspective. I mean, if we look at this very frankly, Donald Trump ran the most chaotic major political organization in recent American history. He was a figure in the limelight for decades, and the idea that somehow he or his team running this chaotic presidential campaign with his personality could have done something like Russia collusion in 2016. The bottom line is Hillary Clinton lost the campaign, fair and square. And that's really what I think we have to reckon with going forward.
Well, important point you brought up there. Aaron, what is your view on the fact that there was an investigation in the first place? Should there have been an investigation, or was it politically motivated?
Everything we know so far about the investigation shows it, I think, to be pretty specious. There was a tip that a campaign low-level volunteer named George Papadopoulos might have heard from some guy who claimed to have connections to the Russian government that the Russians might have compromising emails on Hillary Clinton. That is the official story for why an FBI investigation is launched. I personally think there are other ways to look into that if you find that damning than launching a counterintelligence probe on a presidential campaign. And then going forward, we saw that the FBI used this Steele dossier, this DNC-funded Oppo research, to even apply for FISA warrants to surveil another low-level, now ex-Trump campaign volunteer, Carter Page. So if you look at the origins of this investigation, I think they're actually pretty questionable, and that's why, you know, there was some talk before about hearing about what happened in 2016. For 2 years now, more than that, we've been talking about 2016. We know what happened. We know that the U.S. intelligence agencies, a few of them, not all of them, but a few of them who've been involved in this process, they accused the Russian government of stealing some emails. Okay. We also know that a Russian clickbait troll farm factory put up some juvenile social media posts that nobody saw and were silly. Okay. And we're supposed to believe that that's a big Pearl Harbor style attack on the country. That's been the dominant narrative around that. So we know what happened there. We also know now on the issue of collusion, the dominant question hanging over us for 2 years, that there was no collusion. Robert Mueller has just said that. So I would like to know, actually, what the FBI was doing to base its investigation, one that ended up consuming the country for 2 years, on such specious grounds. And not because I support Donald Trump. I don't. I firmly oppose pretty much all of Trump's policies. I think he's a huge danger. But I don't want to grant intelligence communities the kind of reverence we've given them, where basically because they decide that they don't like that Trump is saying nice things about Vladimir Putin, that all of a sudden they think it's justified to open up a sprawling, all-consuming investigation. Partly because that same power could be used against progressive candidates who I might support in the future if they happen to go against bipartisan foreign policy orthodoxy in the U.S.
Joel, what do you think? Is that a bad precedent?
Well, I mean, let's unpack what was just said. First and foremost, multiple officials lied to the FBI about contacts with Russia. Why were the Russians talking to so many people in the Trump orbit? I ran for office once. As a candidate, you don't have foreign officials, you don't have foreign citizens engaging in your political campaign. They can't vote for you, they can't give you money. So what was going on? And Russia did send hundreds of millions of social media posts in addition to other other espionage activities into our system. And to act as if it was just a couple of emails here or there is completely missing the point and counterfactual. And those people would not have pled guilty to lying, and they would not have lied if there was not something that they were concerned about.
John?
Let me respond to that quickly.
I'll get you in a minute. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Aaron.
Putting aside this joke-worthy claim about Russian social media posts, they were tiny and they were stupid. They included advertisements for Jesus urging people with masturbation problems for help, okay? That was the Russian social media angle. But in terms of lying about contacts with Russians, actually, only the lies about contacts with Russians are so inconsequential. There's Michael Flynn not remembering the full details of his conversations with the Russian ambassador, which we know about because they were wiretapped.
You're essentially saying that every single action that people were found guilty of was irrelevant.
Very quickly, Aaron, go ahead.
If I can finish, those wiretap phone calls with the Russian ambassador, we know about them because they were wiretapped in their transcripts. They don't show anything illicit. They show Flynn and Kislyak discussing a few matters, not just Russia, but even Trump trying to get Russia to veto a measure about Israel at the UN.
If they're inconsequential, if they were just short contacts, why did they lie about it?
In the case of Flynn, if you look at if you look at the transcripts of what's called his 302, the FBI summary of his interview, you'll see that the details are fuzzy, and what he's concealing is, in any event, inconsequential because he's not remembering his full conversation with an ambassador that was wiretapped. We know what was said.
I'd like you to be
and they were talking
lawyer.
about things including Israel.
Okay, go ahead, John.
So all of these prosecutions as a result of the special counsel all have to do with interactions with the special counsel's office. None of them have anything to do with supposed Russia collusion. So there's a red line here that we have to be very clear about. Plus, I think that there are a number of people that should be very careful because if everything is released, and I think it's a good thing also, I like the idea of sunshine and transparency, we're going to find out what happened with the communications with the FISA judge? Why was the dossier used? All of the communications between these corrupt FBI officials and corrupt intelligence agency officials, all of them corrupting their agencies at the very top in a very, very damaging way for the United States. I mean, in many ways, this is a tragic situation politically for America. And this is all going to come clean also.
Should not be allowed to see this.
No, I said let them all come out. But I'm saying a lot of information that people who are detractors of Trump are not going to be happy with what they find out about what Obama administration officials did in 16 and 15.
Okay, go ahead, Frank.
Let me play the reporter here for a minute. I used to do that on TV. I write the story.
Right.
The story is about you've got trolls, you've got activities like this, you've got misrepresentations of who has spoken to whom on the Russian side. You have the president haranguing the FBI director and then firing the FBI director and then saying on TV that he did it partly because of the Russia investigation. What do we base our society on? We base it on a degree of confidence in the system, right? That it can function and that it can cleanse itself, that it can investigate itself. When the special counsel was named, there was not confidence, and that's why the Attorney General, to the great ire of the President of the United States, recused him so that there could be an independent investigation. You go into an investigation saying something needs to be investigated here. That doesn't mean you should jump to judgment. That is a problem that took place in much of the public sphere. But the investigation, I would argue, was necessary, and an independent investigation was necessary. Ask the former Attorney General, who was beat up regularly for having done it.
Yeah, but as we've heard, Frank, many are questioning whether it was necessary in the first place or whether it was a political
what I'm saying is that if we look at what we saw over the President of the United States standing, saying, Russia, you should release Hillary Clinton's emails, and then what happens, okay? Were there enough questions? Another president might have said, you know what, nothing happened here. We need to look into it so that you can be convinced of that, instead of attacking it day after day after day. I was at the White House the day that Ed Meese stepped out back in the Reagan years and announced the Iran-Contra investigation. And it was from the administration that said, something's gone wrong here. We need to get to the bottom of it. I was around here when we had the Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky thing. And the Clintonites beat up on the special counsel in much the same way. But there was a need to pull out the facts so that the public could understand what went on. Those facts are required.
All right, Joel.
If I can just say, I don't think that Trump making a joke.
One moment,
at a news
Aaron, I'll get
conference-
to you in a moment. Joel, go ahead.
Well, no, I just, to get at the point, I have been in classified briefings, as you have in Congress, and members of Congress have a right to know right now. There should not be a delay. This is a document that impacts American national security. I don't know what's written in there. Attorney General Barr knows. No reporters know. The idea that somehow these individuals were lying to the FBI on a repetitive basis to put themselves in jail, it's counter-logical. What was underneath all of that? And I do think that from a political national security perspective, not the narrow legal one, but from a political national security one, which is the purview of Congress, they need to get the information.
Okay, Aaron, go ahead.
If you look at who the Trump figures were indicted for lying about, there's not a single instance where Mueller alleges that any of them were lying to cover up contacts between themselves and a Russian intermediary. There are no Russian intermediaries here. The only actual Russian is the Russian ambassador, Sergei Kislyak. That's the case of Flynn. And in the case of Michael Cohen, he spoke to Vladimir Putin's, to an assistant in Vladimir Putin's office, press office, who told him that they couldn't help Michael Cohen and Felix Sater build a Trump Tower in Moscow. And I want to say on a comment that was said earlier, I don't think that Trump making a joke at a news conference saying, Russia, if you're listening, I don't think that's a sufficient predicate for a 2-year investigation. Now, I do think there should have been an investigation ultimately with Mueller because there were so many questions. And because there was uncertainty, I think it's important that we got answers.
Okay.
My point now, though, is that now we got the answers. We actually got the answers.
Okay.
And we need to accept them and not double down on a conspiracy theory, in part because this thing has given Trump a huge re-election gift, as we're already seeing.
Right. Okay, go ahead, Frank.
Really important. We do need to be very mindful of the special counsel business and how much time it takes up. All of these different investigations. The president says this should never happen to another president again. Well, not so. I mean, there needs to be independent investigation when it's warranted. But it should be very rare because 2 years, millions of dollars, a distortion of the public debate, public policy, it stops.
Right, rightly or wrongly, Frank, this is being perceived in certain quarters as being something we can use politically against a president.
Yeah, well, welcome to democracy.
I
mean, that happens.
That's right.
That happens.
That's right.
Well, except for one great concern. In America, we respect the rule of law.
Yes.
And the special counsel can only be activated when there's a crime to be investigated.
Right.
So this was very unusual. It was unprecedented. There was no crime that was part of, suspicion is not a crime. There was Iran-Contra, there were criminal acts that were committed.
There must have been some underlying rationale.
The special counsel was illegally set up, illegally, unlawfully set up, and it's a very dangerous precedent because now the special counsel will be a political tool for Republican and Democratic presidents going forward in a very deleterious manner for the rule of law in the United States.
So you're saying it's illegal because there was no underlying crime?
There was no crime that was declared. In the actual documentation that authorized the special counsel's office, there was no crime that was cited. No crime at all. Collusion, if it had taken place, is not a crime.
Right.
There was no crime. He was allowed to investigate the man, President Trump, and everyone around him. That's not what the special counsel's office has historically been about. It's about investigating a crime, and it didn't take place here, and the precedent is terrible for American democracy.
But he was also, let's be straight, he was also about investigating Russian interference in the election, and there was a need to understand that impact and what occurred.
You don't do the special counsel's office for that.
Well,
there
first
are
of all,
other
many could argue that the special counsel, because it reports to the Attorney General, is not an independent investigation in and of itself. I'm happy to have an independent investigator that doesn't report to the president that he's investigating.
Frank, I'm going to get to something that you'll be very familiar with, and that is the media. Looks like one of the main casualties in this whole process has been the media, and we've heard Trump tell us from day one, in fact, even before day one, fake news all the time, discrediting the media, trying to make them, trying to force them without any credibility. Does this play into him now? Because he's going to go about saying,
oh, sure.
I was right.
This completely, this plays into that narrative. He can say, I've been saying this all along. He tries to portray the media as being part of a almost a conspiracy. I think that's going too far, but there's no question in my mind, and I will have a lot of people and colleagues and friends in the business who will, want to throw me off a cliff for saying this.
Yeah.
But many in the media did go too far. Many media companies did go too far. They got drawn into this. It became the addiction. It fed the ratings and the circulation and the eyeballs. It went ka-ching in the tiller, and there were record profits.
I don't think the shareholders...
That is a wrong way to make the determination.
Yeah, but I don't think the shareholders at those companies are complaining.
No.
Well, the shareholders aren't complaining now. They will later.
Trump is great for business.
This is
Okay.
but the problem is this kind of coverage when it's done this way, and it's bad for journalism, it's bad for our democracy, it's bad for the country.
Okay, Aaron, we've talked about the media, we've talked about really big names in the media here, which we're pushing the story of collusion. Do you think have you heard any contrition? Anybody saying, well, we're sorry, we got it wrong?
I've heard no contrition. All I've heard is attacks on those of us who got it right. I've gotten plenty of that on Twitter. And I've also heard people even doubling down on the conspiracy theory. So when your first conspiracy theory collapses, you have to invent a new one to cover up for the first one's failure. So now we've seen people, pundits on MSNBC especially, talk about, is there a cover-up going on? Is Barr leading a cover-up? Is Mueller possibly compromised? I mean, this is the guy we've been hearing about for 2 years as the patron saint. He was, Robert Mueller. He was the beacon of integrity. And now all of a sudden we're hearing is, was he stifled? Even though Attorney General Barr has made clear that Mueller was never interfered with. So we're seeing from the same people who've profited off of this conspiracy theory now doubling down on it. And it's a humiliation for them. And I guess now the one question I have is because Mueller was always, hanging in the background and he was not finished his investigation, they could always claim that or raise expectations that Mueller would validate their conspiracy theory. Now Mueller has rejected it. The question is, will audiences in the U.S. continue to follow along with these failed pundits, or will they wise up to their scam?
John?
An extraordinary irony here, Anand, in that there is going to be a media reckoning, I think, in the weeks and months to come. But it was two political reporters who wrote the book Shattered. They had inside access to the Hillary Clinton campaign. They published in March or April of 2017,
Jonathan Allen
and Amy Parnes, that the day after the election in 2016, the Hillary Clinton campaign concocted the Russia hoax. John Podesta and Robbie Mook concocted it. And two political reporters wrote about this. It's out in the open, and yet with all of this taking place, no one wanted to look back and see what was so obvious with the inability of Hillary Clinton to accept the blame for her defeat.
I think we need to be very, very careful about not overstating what was concluded from yesterday's cover memo by the Trump-appointed Attorney General to Congress. So let's not overread it. Not everything is absolved, as the president said. It reminds me of the sort of ISIS video, we've defeated ISIS, he keeps on doing every couple of weeks.
And let's not over-conclude that the media, all of them, in all of the coverage was bad, because there was some terrific journalism. There's been a lot of very important, very chaotic things to report out of this administration.
Right, but Joel, the Democrats say the investigation continues. It moves to Congress right now.
Yeah, I mean...
Is that a smart thing on the part of the Democrats?
Well, look, Democrats are in a hard place, I think, as we've just described, related to how to continue to investigate a national security challenge of foreign invasion of our democratic process, which did occur, which the intelligence community has assessed occurred, to make that stick, probably bring up Bob Mueller to testify. We'll see what he says in a different venue from a cover memo. But it is very difficult right now for Democrats to make a case about this being the primary. But I would also argue that in 2018, that was not what got Democrats elected. Democrats ran on meat and potatoes issues, on health care, on climate change. If we want to talk about media hoaxes, but in reverse, it's happening on the other side.
If the investigation continues, it's going to suck all the oxygen out.
Well, I think what you'll end up seeing is certain investigative committees like Judiciary really lean into this and others move to other directions.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.